our downtown doesn't feel safe, it isn't safe, we will fail as a city. I just believe that. And the fentanyl crisis on our streets is causing death and disorder. I can't mince words there. We have an obligation to do more.
Well, that's Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell talking about a new initiative to revitalize public safety and public health in downtown Seattle. So, what's really new this time around? Plus, what impact will a new city measure have that hopes to help renters who are behind on their monthly payments? And also, will a battle of words in Olympia over some major transportation projects turn into any action? Well, we're talking about that and a whole lot more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your local coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine. And after a spring break for me and some well-deserved family leave on the other end of this microphone, I'm joined once again by David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I always say no good deed goes unpunished here. So what is it like getting back in the swing of working again after some very well-deserved family time off?
Yeah, I mean, it always takes a few days to do, or maybe even a couple of weeks because you got to refill your pipeline. But
that's right. That's right.
Just adjusting to being a working dad with a 6-month-old.
Yeah, it's a thing, man. It's a thing. So hang in there. Great to be with you once again, David. Thank you to you. Thank you to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. The Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker campaign is ready for you. Check it out. You can get your very own decal for just a $5 a month pledge. Love to have you. Angie, Cindy, I just sent stickers out your way. Thank you for your support. Send back a photo of that decal so I can tell everybody how we like to stick together on this show. And finally, thanks to Converge Media, our partner for the video version of the podcast. The video version of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get rolling with right here, right now. All right, David, let's talk about what Mayor Harrell was saying in his press conference this week about revitalizing downtown. He wants stepped-up police patrols to deal with drug dealers. He's also talking about putting a specialized overdose response unit from the Seattle Fire Department in place, and even offering contingency management, as it's called, in the form of gift cards given if people get into a 12-week treatment program for drugs and show some results. I covered a lot of ground there, but just some overall thoughts about this announcement to start with.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was inevitable. I mean, I think it was part of why he was elected, kind of calling on, cleaning up downtown or kind of getting downtown back on track. He's, of course, got a good relationship with the business community. And, and by the way, the All-Star game is coming up. So I think there's some additional pressure to kind of make Seattle look nice.
Good call.
And then, of course, it's there are certain, I think lots of downtown is fine and pleasant to be in right now. And then, of course, there are certain parts of downtown that are not all that pleasant to be in. And so, I think as Councilmember Lewis said, if downtown sneezes, Seattle gets a cold. And so this is him sort of planting his flag, as far as the actual steps and their effectiveness goes. We'll see. I mean, these are fairly deeply ingrained and thorny issues we're dealing with here, which is fentanyl in its presence, which is just highly, highly addictive and deadly. Housing, mental health support. There's lots of things here that, and I don't think the mayor would say that a gift card is going to solve those things, but it shouldn't go without saying that a gift card is not going to solve those things. So how this rolls out, of course, is always, the proof is in the pudding on these things. Lots of mayors have had plans for cleaning up downtown, and we're still where we are.
Yeah, I did want to dive into that whole contingency management piece, that whole idea of giving people gift cards, and they're going to try this out. There has been some research behind it that shows that this works in many different cases. And I really thought it was striking with the mayor, and I of course he was going to say this message, but it's not only law enforcement we're talking about, but it's also this kind of social outreach work that's happening as well. I guess it's kind of like trying to mix that carrot and the stick on this one. I'm trying to figure out, when do we add more carrot? When do we need more stick? Because I think, I don't know, a lot of different people have different opinions as to how much enforcement should be down there versus how much of this drug addiction treatment. And I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is how it was always going to be with Bruce Harrell as mayor. I mean, he ran pretty explicitly. I mean, he was never a defund the police type. He was never
Right.
he's always been supportive of more police. So I don't think it should come as a surprise to anybody that he thinks enforcement, police and a police presence should be a big part of this equation. And at the same time, he's also tried to sort of cast himself as not exactly like a law and order type, however you want to define that. That he also tries to cast himself as understanding of the kind of deep societal issues here. And so, I think he's walking the line that I would have guessed he would be walking, which is sort of signaling on the one hand to downtown businesses and folks wanting to see more police, that's what he's doing, but then also kind of propping up, organizations like Just Care or Lead. I'm not sure kind of what they're going by now these days, but outreach programs and having the overdose teams as part of this. I think that if a year ago you would have been asked to draw up kind of what a Bruce Harrell response to downtown looks like, I think this is about what I would have expected.
Yeah, yeah, and having the Seattle Fire Department involved with that overdose piece is huge. And just I think too about the connections, David, that are soon going to be there from the backside of Pike Place Market with people coming up from the waterfront. So there's a lot of different pieces at play here. And you're right, I think the proof is definitely in the pudding. But I did want to move on to something the city council's looking at this week. The Seattle Film Commission officially appointed. Hooray for that. Looking forward to seeing what that group can do. But also, the council will be voting on a measure to limit the amount of fees charged for the late payment of rent, as well as notices issued to tenants. And so the council's been talking about reducing these fees to a maximum of $10 per month. Councilmember Nelson has been pushing for $50, so a bit of a disagreement on the council here, but it looks like the $10 level might have it. What I find, though, interesting about this, David, is the city's research on this. It shows the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspection's Property Owner and Tenant Assistance, or POTA group, is seeing its calls for assistance literally go through the roof here. 2,400 calls in 2019, and now that number is up close to 5,000, more than double. The wait time to respond to complaints, 13.6 days in 2019, over 25 days here in 2023. So I wanted to lay out that background because hidden in this bill that says, okay, let's cap the late payments, is a realization that this new rule could mean Seattle needs another SDCI officer to deal with all these delays and all these calls and complaints that keep coming in. I just wanted to throw that out there, David. Does it surprise you to hear about all those different wait times? Because Seattle has added a lot of different regulations over the past couple of years when it comes to renters.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, in part, I think what we're still seeing is hangover from emergency orders that have kind of have rolled back. There were eviction moratoriums in place, and so I think a lot of what was in place was sort of slowing some of these complaints for a while, especially around late fees. If people aren't if people are given a little more latitude to go a couple months without paying, then maybe these complaints wouldn't come up as much. So I think I haven't looked at eviction data yet. There had been a lot of warnings about kind of a tsunami of evictions from what I've gathered. That maybe hasn't happened as much, but I do think it's not all that surprising that as the kind of rules governing the relationship between landlords and tenants kind of fall back into place to what they were before the COVID pandemic, that there'd be a lot of kind of backlog there and catch up.
Right. And I guess I just wanted to figure out what this does to the rental market when you talk about limiting late fees like this. Is it another nail in the coffin for landlords who say, we want out of Seattle here? I'm just trying to look at this big picture here and what it does to the market. I know this is just one piece of legislation, but it's one of many pieces of legislation that have been enacted by the council. And I wonder what it does in the rental market where interest rates are through the roof for the landlords, et cetera. And I'm just trying to figure out what's next here when it comes to this and what it means for landlords.
Right. I mean, I think landlords will tell you that, yes, it is another kind of nail in the coffin. It makes it more difficult. It's sort of hard to parse apart those arguments because there's a lot of correlation and it's hard to find exactly what the causation is. There are some much larger forces at play in the rental market, I would say, than the difference between $10 and $50 of late fees, around interest rates. And
Yeah.
um, people, people are not able to buy houses as well because mortgage rates are so high. And so that puts more
Yep.
pressure on the rental market. Uh, that said, it seems like rents have kind of slowed down a little bit. So I don't know. I mean, I think um, it's just there's so many sort of big factors playing into housing these days,
Yeah.
that it would be hard, I think, to drill into the precise effect of something like this, capping
Yeah.
late fees.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm working on a story this week on Seattle Channel, folks, talking about tree protection regulations, which is a big project the Seattle City Council is working on. We'll cover it in the podcast here in a little bit, but I urge you to check out the show because man, we are talking to some landlords on that one, and there's been a lot of back and forth on that piece. So a lot still ahead with that. David, thanks a million for all those different insights there. And I wanted to move on to our next story here. Is it time to raise our property taxes to build some new crisis care centers in King County? Well, your ballot is due on this really, really soon. We're looking into this countywide special election coming up on Now Hear This. Well, here's hoping you have your special King County elections ballot in the mail. It is due on the 25th, so heads up on that. We're talking about the vote to increase our property taxes for a crisis care centers levy. This would build 5 new walk-in mental health clinics around King County. It would be a little bit over $10 a month for the median-priced homeowner. I recently talked with King County Councilmember Gurmai Zahalai about this with one of the measure's opponents, the one and only Tim Eyman, and here's what they're saying about this plan to deal with our behavioral health crisis.
Whether we're talking about unprecedented levels of mental health issues or record-breaking overdose deaths, substance use disorders, this is a problem that we need to solve with urgency.
The implementation plan happens after the voters vote for the tax increase. I think most voters would want to see the implementation plan before they okay the money.
Well, David, there's no organized opposition to the crisis care centers levy, but Eyman and a few others wrote the against statement you'll see on the ballot. I just wanted to ask you, what do you make of what the council members saying we need to act with urgency, and what Eyman is saying we should have seen a plan first before you start asking for money? Some thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that anyone is super pleased about relying on property taxes more, and I think even the proponents of this would be happy.
Yeah,
to tell you
Councilmember Zahalai said that as well. Yeah,
it's not, it's not quite sales tax regressive, but it's not, at a time when interest rates are going up and housing has been so hard. And a lot of folks who have lived in their homes, maybe bought their homes when they were cheap, but now are paying property taxes on a home that's worth a lot more, but they're on a fixed income. It does create pressures on people when property taxes go up. As it is, a county like King County or, Seattle or whatever don't have a lot of options beyond property tax if they want to fund something. It's why that basically every levy they've run is a property tax levy.
yeah.
And so, like every time these come up, the question is, on balance, is the juice worth the squeeze? I guess. And on this, it's undeniable that there is a mental health resources shortage, and there's a pretty broad consensus on that. I mean, that's not a liberal talking point. It's most folks would acknowledge that. Having more mental health resources is kind of key to, back to the downtown question, especially on Third Avenue or whatever it might be. There's a lot of folks down there who really need help, and they need it quickly, and that just doesn't exist right now. And so, I think there's always some angst and concern about raising property taxes in an area where property taxes are already quite high. And also, there's just such a huge chorus of calls to address the mental health crisis that, I would be. There has not been a recent property tax levy that has failed, as far as what I can remember. I would say this has a pretty good shot.
Yeah, no, I believe it, and I think it's difficult to talk about raising taxes at any time, but you're right, especially right now in the unsettled economy economy we're in, it's an interesting discussion. And I was really struck by this, David. Councilmember Zahalai was very poised during this debate. He always is. But I was especially struck by his reluctance to say exactly where these crisis care centers would be located. He did say they could be put into existing buildings. So that's very good to know. But I just think back to the pushback in the Chinatown ID neighborhood, for example, last year when the county tried to expand a homeless shelter there. That got pushed back by that neighborhood successfully, I should point out. I'm just trying to figure out what is it going to be like to site 5 crisis care centers. And these are walk-in centers, folks. You don't need any sort of recommendation or a referral from police or anything like that. Some thoughts about citing these, David, because I think that's a big part of this discussion.
And it always is. And I always think it's kind of the last thing that people bring up, but in some ways is oftentimes the biggest barrier. I mean, there's a reason why we never put in safe consumption sites as was proposed, I think in 2016 with pretty broad political support, but there just was they could never find where these things would go. And, someone can, including elected officials, can support something in theory. And then when it comes to actually putting it in their city, there becomes some hesitance. So I don't know the answer to it. I think it's going to be that's going to be a very long and drawn out battle, I believe.
Yeah.
And, there's a balance. There's a balance because you want to put these things where the people are. You don't want to put these in some far-flung areas that no one's ever going to use. At the same time, a lot of times that ends up, being in neighborhoods that have borne a lot of the brunt of some of these challenges. I think that's what we saw in the Chinatown International District. Because on the one hand, that's where a lot of folks are who need shelter. On the other hand, because it's where a lot of folks are who need shelter, there are a lot of resources there and a lot of presence that people in the community are clearly getting a little tired of. So, I think that's going to be the ultimate push-pull of this.
Yeah, I think so too. And it'll be interesting for me to watch where, if indeed these things get cited and put in and we pass this ballot measure as a county here, how that works out with other counties around us. Pierce County doesn't have these kind of facilities. Snohomish County doesn't have these facilities. Are people going to be referred to the King County facility? I mean, how is that going to work? I'm very interested to see how this pans out. But bottom line, folks, I want to make sure you get in your ballots on April 25th. So there's a ton happening there. Make sure you read through that ballot measure and check out the show that I did on crisis care centers on Seattle Channel if you'd like. A good back and forth debate. All right, a quick update from Olympia here, David. We're less than a week away from the scheduled end of the session on April 23rd. And we spoke a little bit about this on KUOW last week. I feel like the biggest win, if you want to call it that, or least watered down bill passage for the Dems this session, how about that, comes with gun regulations, banning the sale of what they call assault-style weapons like an AR-15, often used in mass shootings. They've been talking about this for years, and it seems like lawmakers really on both sides of the aisle are finally responding to this.
Yeah, I think I found that surprising too. I mean, in some ways because it seemed like this was really going to be the session of housing, and it was that in a lot of ways. But the fact of, oddly, at least from my perspective, and maybe this is just because I was like on parental leave or whatever, but I kind of snuck up on me a little bit. I had my eye on some of the missing middle housing and of course transportation, because that's what I cover. But it just felt like I kind of looked up once and then suddenly this ban on assault weapons was making its way through. So, I think it was spurred on, of course, because there have been yet more shootings. And so there was sort of political appetite for it. Of course, Democrats, I think, they did much better in last election and then maybe had been previously predicted. So they were feeling a little bolder. But yeah, I mean, I guess you just, because this has come up so many times, you just sort of get in a pattern of thinking, this will come up and then it won't go anywhere. But then this one found the right vein to make its way through.
Yeah, I suppose so. And I guess I wanted to follow up on some of those other pieces because I thought that some of them did end up being watered down, I guess is one way to look at it, or at least the subject of compromise here. Whole lot of housing, because there was so much talk about this. We're going to see quadplexes allowed in every city. It looks like now it's going to be more like duplexes. And I guess my biggest concern about that one in passing this House legislation which is going to have, is it going to have enough of an impact, a sizable enough impact that we'll actually see some differences, some changes when it comes to our affordable housing crisis? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were talking about this on KUW last week, but
Yeah.
and I think I think in some ways the time for this to have made a big difference is passing. That's not to say it won't has passed. That's not to say it won't come back.
Right.
But just larger forces have made the housing market here a little weirder. And people don't love to do things when the environment is weird. Whereas even just a couple of years ago, you could have rented or sold part of a duplex pretty quickly because there's so much demand. My guess is it's not going to be like a gush of new housing, because it's not like, the projects that we're talking here are not really the kind of projects that like a big developer would come in
Say,
and do.
ooh, I really want to do that. Yeah.
No, because it's just there's not that much money there. So I think really what this could and maybe will do is, I'm imagining folks who want to age in their own homes. They don't, and so you imagine converting your home into a duplex where a caregiver could live long term or something like that. Or, people's kids can't move back to Seattle right now. So
no kidding.
In fact, I have a friend whose parents have just converted their home into a duplex so that he could live in the other apartment in that house. So things like that, where I think it would likely open up more possibilities for kind of one-off projects that could improve the kind of long-term sustainability for someone who's living in a big house, something like that. I don't know that it's going to spur huge, big-time developer interest to overhaul, transform Seattle overnight or anything like that.
Right. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens on a statewide level with this too. Again, some pretty lofty goals to start with, but allowing for those duplexes, I think it'll make a difference. And it's also interesting to see that the state is exerting this power over cities. The Association of Washington Cities was really a strong player on this. Like they finally came to the table here. So potentially some progress there. I know also I should point out there's a big battle over drug possession, the Blake bill, as it's called. Looks like it's going down to the wire here. Going to keep you posted on that one. Will it be a misdemeanor or a gross misdemeanor? Some thieverish deal making, I believe, going on at the Capitol right now, because they've got to figure something out before the session, because there's a deadline on the temporary measure they passed a couple years ago to deal with this. So definitely want to keep you posted on that one. All right. Well, coming up, you want some tough talk from Olympia? What's happening with the transportation budget? But what's that going to get us in terms of new projects getting built? David's got the details on Transportation Talk. David, you wrote recently about some haranguing or quibbling. There are a lot of great verbs in your story there. Talking about Governor Inslee directing a little bit of this towards the state legislature transportation budget. Is there a storm coming? Is this a tempest in a teapot? What did you find out in talking with the governor's office and lawmakers too?
Well, I mean, there's always going to be, haranguing and quibbling over budget between Governor Inslee and the legislature. This one kind of stood out to me, though, because the Office of Financial Management came down pretty hard on the proposed budget from the legislature, basically saying it overpromised what could actually be accomplished. It had $7 billion. Both, I think the House and the Senate versions each had around $7 billion in capital projects that they were saying were going to get done in the next 2 years. And Governor Inslee's office saying basically there's no way we would be able to do that. Wow. So that's interesting. I mean, I think it's an interesting acknowledgement of the limits that go beyond just money when it comes to transportation right now. And, we could talk about this in terms of ferries too, but
right.
The money can be there, but just getting this work done right now is so hard, because contractors are stretched very thin. There's a workforce shortage still. Costs are just incredibly unpredictable. And so Governor Inslee is just kind of warning that if this budget as it is passes, that what will probably end up happening is certain projects will get prioritized over others, but without any kind of public conversation around that. The legislators counter that, look, these are huge projects, and by budgeting $7 billion in capital projects. They also don't really think all $7 billion is going to get spent. But by doing that, they're kind of hedging their bets, because by making the money available, from their point of view, it's okay if that money goes unspent, but it would be bad if they did not budget enough and they ran out of money. And so they're sort of counting on, sure, we're putting lots of money in for projects, but we're assuming that some of these projects are going to get delayed, something's going to happen, and then we'll just roll that money over to the next legislative session.
I did want to ask, it was interesting to see a discussion that has played out in Seattle play out at the state level too. State patrol dollars that are out there, some of these going unspent because there's some vacancies on the force. This has been happening with law enforcement agencies across the country. So I think with these budgets, they've been trying to reallocate some of those dollars. Been a bit of a battle over that. We need some money for incentives to hire new recruits. I know Inslee was saying, hey, let's use that money for more overtime. Some thoughts about what's going on with the state patrol right now, because I don't think any law enforcement agency is safe from this shortage of officers we're seeing really around the country.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. I mean, this debate has gotten so hyper polarized in Seattle around this. Do we take the money that is going unspent on vacancies in the Seattle Police Department and put it somewhere else? And I think it's because it all happened on this backdrop of defund the police that's so charged. When at the state level, the legislators are basically proposing to do exactly the same thing, but it's much lower key because these same people did not at one point pledge to defund the police. So they have a little more latitude to call this just, budgeting, normal budgeting.
Reallocation,
reallocation, not some ideological statement around law enforcement. I think anytime there is money that's perceived as going to go unspent, someone's going to want that money. There's so much competition for budget. They see the fact that the state patrol has all these unfilled vacancies and that the salaries for those vacancies are not going to be spent. They want to put it to use right away. This is happening a lot at the same time as they're probably going to provide quite a bit of money for signing bonuses and lateral transfers for the state patrol. So it's not like this is not a defund the police statement because they're in other parts funding the police more. This is we have a lot of priorities and a lot of things we want to spend money on, and we're not going to let any dollar just sit there unspent.
Yep. That's a great way to look at it. All right. Well, thank you for that, David. It is time to wrap up here. I wanted to ask this burning question that I had over the past several weeks here. How much longer do we get to dare to dream that Jared Kelenic of the Mariners is going to keep having an all-star caliber season? What do you think, man? He is looking really good at the plate, hitting lefties and the whole thing.
He's looking really good. I don't think he's gonna sustain what he's been doing the last week or so, but in some ways that doesn't matter because if he becomes an average player, that's like an enormous win. We're all excited because he looks like an all-star right now, but I would accept average from Jared Kelenic and be totally happy about that.
I think that'd be great. And if the Mariners can learn how to play defense again and maybe how to run the bases, then we really got ourselves a team together. So we'll see how that goes. David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening out there to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you might listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support there too. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.